The Halveth Accord called itself a peacekeeping force, but for Earth it was a leash made of legislative wire. Drafted centuries before humans achieved reliable interstellar propulsion, the Accord's laws were built to contain what the core races feared most: escalation from the periphery. Clause 9 was their most effective weapon. It designated emerging civilizations as containment-level species, limiting their ability to build or operate fleets beyond orbital escort capacity. Earth was bound to that clause, forbidden from forming a true navy, prohibited from deploying autonomous defense systems beyond the moon, and required to submit launch schedules to Accord audit nodes months in advance. The punishment for deviation was immediate embargo, asset seizure, or in rare cases, sterilization protocols disguised as entropy balancing. 30 years passed under those terms. Earth complied, on the surface at least. Diplomats did their work well. Earth embedded itself in scientific forums, signed every non-aggression clause, opened its databanks to Accord inspection teams, and played the part of a cooperative civilization. When they asked to review Clause 9 after proving biological adaptability in 7 off-world environments, the motion was tabled. When they appealed again after achieving industrial parity with several Council member states, it was denied. Earth took no military action. It instead increased its presence in neutral zones, unarmed research colonies, cultural outreach, mining contracts deep in Oort-class belts. Accord records showed Earth as predictable, even boring. But beneath the Arctic mantle, hidden under centuries of tectonic camouflage, the Delphi chamber convened. It had no official location, no listed members, and no charter. What it did have was Riven Dax. Commander Dax had never worn rank insignia, never led a public force, never even stood in front of a podium. But across internal Terran channels, his word was movement. He spoke only when there was no alternative. He'd been there at the genesis of Project Veilglass, a generational effort to break Clause 9 not by defiance, but by redesigning the concept of a fleet itself. If Earth couldn't launch military vessels, they would build modular cores that looked like mining equipment. If coordination was forbidden, they would isolate logic trees and decentralize control to the point of plausible deniability. Veilglass was less a fleet than an illusion wrapped in function. Transport rigs, cargo haulers, long-range weather probes, every one of them housed inert military-grade matrices, buried beneath commercial software layers, waiting for ignition keys only 3 people alive were authorized to use. Earth didn't rush it. They waited. They embedded. And then, finally, the Accord gave them justification. The Eridani 4 incident wasn't called that in official Accord records. It was logged as a containment and entropy quarantine event, citing unverified biohazard signatures detected in the atmosphere of Earth's largest off-world colony. But everyone knew it was fabricated. The colony was unarmed. Its personnel were geneticists, engineers, exoplanet biologists, people trained to build sustainable environments on hostile worlds, not wage war. Accord intervention teams arrived without notice. They disabled local networks, seized experimental cores, and detained the senior staff. All prototypes were removed. One technician tried to activate a beacon and was stunned in front of his colleagues. The lead scientist, a man who had authored 3 major joint papers with Accord researchers, was photographed in restraints. When Earth requested evidence of contamination, the Accord cited classified thresholds. When Earth asked for a joint inspection team, they were told the matter was closed. Inside the Delphi chamber, silence held for 24 hours. No speeches, no proposals, just Riven Dax, seated alone at the head of the Obsidian Crescent, staring at the frozen footage of Eridani IV-4's lab raid. The image was paused on the frame where a prototype containment field, Earth's own design, was being boxed by an Accord officer tagged with an official Halveth seal. Around him, the other chamber members didn't speak. They didn't need to. The footage said everything. It wasn't just theft. It wasn't even humiliation. It was erasure. Earth had contributed to the Accord's scientific backbone for 2 generations, had participated in joint programs, had submitted to every audit, every clause, every limitation, and in return, they had been handled like criminals in their own colony. Dax's hand moved once, A single touch against the recessed panel embedded in the table. That was all it took. The ignition of Protocol Endgate wasn't dramatic. No alarms, no flashpoints, no visible motion across Earth's skies. What changed was informational gravity. That quiet shift where a civilization's direction bends inward before launching outward. Endgate wasn't a retaliation order, it was an instruction set. Long dormant modules deep in Veilglass assets flickered awake. Civilian crafts in backwater systems began pre-sequenced diagnostics. Ghost signals transmitted from refueling satellites triggered secure boot commands in mining vessels whose operators believed they were built for nothing more than ore haulage. In Delphi, Riven Dax stood and left without a word. He didn't need to oversee the execution. The plan had been written years ago across 57 independent protocols, each one incapable of compromising the others. Above the Earth, nothing looked different. Accord surveillance satellites still orbited in their programmed patterns. Communications between Earth and its colonies continued. Transports launched and landed on schedule. The official feeds showed compliance. But behind the curtain, behind the silent shift of gears older than most sitting members of the Accord Council, Earth had moved, not with rage, not with noise, but with decision. Endgate wasn't Earth declaring war. It was Earth announcing it had finished waiting. It began with silence. Not the kind bred from diplomacy or distance, but the absence of data, abrupt and complete. Accord command networks, spanning 9 sectors and monitored by redundant AI arrays, noticed the drop within 4 seconds. Earth's orbital transponders, which routinely pinged position and compliance data every 30 minutes, stopped transmitting. Not delayed, not corrupted, simply absent. Satellites calibrated to track every Terran craft beyond Mars displayed only empty vectors. Even Earth's own planetary registry, normally accessible through Accord public mesh, was offline. Within the next minute, 7 outer ring relays failed to handshake with Earth-based servers. Accord technicians flagged it as a probable network sync failure. Nothing in their protocols accounted for deliberate silence. At the outer edge of the Vordal drift, a Terran ore hauler labeled Magnus Theta veered off its declared path without warning. Its automated beacon flashed a level 3 mechanical fault, 1 step below reactor instability. Accord patrol drones in the area moved to assist, expecting minor salvage operations or containment needs. By the time they arrived, Magnus Theta was gone. Its distress signal ended mid-pulse. The region's kinetic radar showed only static echoes and a faint radiation bloom typical of a stealth jump, illegal under Clause 9 and impossible under Earth's supposed tech limits. 18 minutes later, 2 more rigs in the Saroth fields did the same, rerouted, vanished, clean. What the Accord didn't know, and wouldn't understand until it was too late, was that these were not mining ships at all. They were shells. Hollowed designs layered with civilian utility programming, retrofitted over decades to look innocuous while hiding the most dangerous payload Earth had ever produced, modular combat cores. Each one was an autonomous unit, fused with a self-contained tactical logic tree, immune to external override and completely invisible to typical military profiling. They did not emit traditional signatures. They did not respond to hails. They could not be spoofed or rerouted. They weren't built to fight in formations, nor to conquer territory. They had one purpose: disable trust, break the illusion that control was stable. Veilglass hadn't been activated all at once. It didn't need to be. Once Protocol Endgate was confirmed, the trigger sets were scattered across dormant nodes embedded in cargo manifests, planetary customs archives, even the programming of Earth's own transit schedules. No single person activated them. No live command center coordinated them. Each modular unit received one thing only: a target class. That class was defined not by location, but by function. AI, doctrinal relay stations, regional satellite uplinks, transit routing prediction engines, systems that didn't fire weapons, but decided who could and when. Earth didn't aim for ships. It aimed for the infrastructure of certainty. Commander Riven Dax sat in a chamber beneath Iceland's ice crust, hundreds of meters below ocean-fed vents, monitoring only abstracted phase maps. He wasn't issuing orders. He didn't need to. The maps weren't tactical displays. They showed data tension, where information clusters met resistance, where projection frameworks stuttered under sudden asymmetry. 9 sites pulsed in steady intervals, not with violence, but with non-alignment. In the Celerin Shroud, an AI command relay flickered into a looped handshake state, sending the same message 4 times before Kolos. Psing into standby. In the Tauran Link, an orbital pathfinder vanished from its own registry, its control systems locked in recursive diagnostics. No alarms were triggered. The systems weren't destroyed, they were out of step, like musicians in different rooms trying to play the same song. That was all Veilglass needed. Inside one of the activated cores, disguised beneath layers of industrial scaffolding, the interior lit with surgical precision. The compartment was barely large enough for a human to crouch, but no human was inside. The unit's AI engaged its initialization phase. No wireless networks, no uplinks. It read a single encrypted parameter stored in its core, Class 2B, Coordination Nexus. Its decision tree did not include waiting. It had no fallback. It burned its operating key and moved. Across the Accord's defense hubs, confusion spread. Analysts couldn't explain the failures. Nothing matched past cyber attacks. There were no signatures of known Sirek incursion protocols, no evidence of kinetic weapons or electromagnetic disruption. The data simply stopped flowing as expected. At first, internal teams suspected power grid irregularities, maybe even latent faults in the Accord's own predictive maintenance systems. That theory broke down when the relay node in the Carnet fold began misreporting its own location, drifting half a kilometer off where it physically sat, confirmed by visual drone pass. Terran Veilglass units weren't attacking systems, they were desynchronizing them. By rerouting calibration signals and duplicating command strings inside local control modules, the units induced fractional errors in timekeeping, orientation, and routing confidence. In a civilization built on synchronized logistics and predictive fleet dynamics, a half-second uncertainty in trajectory calculations was enough to stall entire deployments. A corrupted relay header could halt AI battlefield simulations for hours. When multiplied across thousands of nodes, the effect was paralyzing. The Accord issued a Level 2 security advisory. Still no mention of war. They didn't see war. There were no ships firing on outposts, no Terran fleets breaching defense zones. What they saw were ghosts, civilian vessels rerouting without authorization, mining drones transmitting false logs, atmospheric data sensors going silent in perfect synchrony. The pattern wasn't escalation, it was implosion. 1 node failure could be tolerated. 2 could be investigated. 4 in exact correlation across disconnected sectors. That broke the model. Within the next 2 hours, 4 entire Accord sectors went dark in analysis terms, not from blackout or destruction. The assets were still there. Satellites orbited, comms arrays rotated, but none of it aligned with expectation. A Fleet Command AI stationed at the Jorvac Spire refused to launch a patrol because it could no longer validate its predictive confidence threshold. A security algorithm flagged all outgoing Terran traffic as both compliant and anomalous, then crashed, trying to resolve the contradiction. No shots had been fired, no embassies stormed. Earth hadn't declared a thing, but the Accord, without realizing it, had already lost something it could never retrieve, its frame of reference. And in a civilization that depended on forecast and system-wide consensus to function, that loss was more lethal than any weapon Earth could have built. By the time the First Fleet captain suggested an organized probe sweep, Ryvan Dax had already stood from his seat. The system did not require his hand anymore. The seeds had bloomed. Earth hadn't launched a war, it had rewritten what war looked like. No proclamation, no coded warning, just a ripple, sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. Across 7,000 communications nodes spanning the Accord's core worlds, a new broadcast blinked into active stream. It bypassed registry approval, DoD, JED checksum filters, and embedded itself into commercial, political, and entertainment feeds alike. People watching market updates found it mid-sentence. Families eating dinner saw it override food supply ads. Planetary transit terminals looped it in full. The opening frame was silent. A static shot of a laboratory corridor on Eridani 4, lit by red emergency tones. Accord officers in full atmospheric armor moved with clinical speed, stepping over debris, pulling cables from exposed data cores. Then came the sound. Shouts, raised hands, the heavy thud of containment foam slamming into steel racks. It wasn't dramatized. It wasn't edited. Every second was clean, time-stamped, location-coded, and cross-referenced against Accord inventory chains. The footage ran 6 minutes without break. In it, viewers saw Terran scientists lined up against containment walls, hands behind their heads, as their research was seized piece by piece. A middle-aged man in a black environmental suit, later confirmed to be Dr. Relin Ma, one of the Accord's own former collaborators, asked repeatedly for inspection protocols. No one answered. A prototype habitat stabilizer was yanked from its frame and crushed by an armored boot, declared potentially contaminant without scanning. The feed ended with one image, a still of the entire lab team in magnetic cuffs, surrounded by crates stamped with Halvath enforcement seals. Then came the overlay. Documents, letters, receipts of arbitration requests submitted by Earth's diplomatic envoy to the Halvath Council 3 days before the raid. Formal language, reasonable tone. A direct appeal for joint inquiry written within the protocols Earth had followed for decades. One reply was visible, an internal memo marked Level 3 Confidential, authored by Councillor Van Julik. It was short, one line. Review denied, no further debate to be tolerated. There was no narration, no commentary, just evidence, unembellished. But across the galaxy, perception shifted as if a dam had broken. Sub-member civilizations, those who had aligned themselves with the Accord under mutual development treaties, began broadcasting demands for an explanation. On Meirin, a culture long known for its academic neutrality, their planetary research guild formally suspended participation in Halvath-backed trials. On Vendel, a minor trade empire, ships were rerouted from Accord-linked lanes within the hour. No one issued threats. They didn't need to. The footage had done what weapons could not. It rewired trust. The Accord tried to control the narrative. Official channels called the footage a malicious deep frame. But their own documentation contradicted them. Satellite signatures matched, personnel rosters confirmed presence, and the denials were dated too cleanly to refute. For years, the Accord had positioned itself as an impartial force, protector of balance, guardian of post-conflict diplomacy. The broadcast cracked that illusion. It didn't accuse, it showed, and showing was far harder to dismantle. While this played out across diplomatic channels and media terminals, Veilglass continued its work. Another communication relay slipped into diagnostic loop. A predictive pathfinder on the edge of the Halor chain began reporting itself as simultaneously docked and in flight, confusing nearby fleet AI. No shots, no alarms, but every second, a new misalignment. Terran craft moved between systems without authorization, yet no Accord ship could track their trajectories. The design was exact. One strike per region, one ghost per doctrine. Not enough to appear as war, too widespread to dismiss as coincidence. In Jorvak's outer defense sector, a patrol cruiser finally achieved lock on a Terran signature. The captain initiated pursuit. By protocol, he should have held for verification, but frustration had replaced procedure. Within 40 seconds, his ship lost internal synchronization. The Fleet Command AI halted all subsystems due to logic conflict redundancy. External backups refused to sync. While technicians attempted a forced restart, a second incident triggered 3 systems away. A data processing hub on the Keltor bridge went offline, its internal mapping overwritten with false topography drawn from obsolete cartographic layers. No direct link between the two events, yet the pattern was unmistakable. Every time Accord ships tried to engage, another piece of their infrastructure failed. It wasn't destruction, it was disqualification. The ability to act was removed without confrontation. The Accord had always relied on its speed, coordination, and the predictive capabilities of its AI mesh. Earth had weaponized every assumption that made that system efficient. For each failed strike, the sense of paralysis grew. In boardrooms and command halls, leaders began asking the one question no protocol had prepared them for. What if the battlefield itself no longer exists? Panic didn't come from violence, it came from unknowing. What Earth had achieved wasn't simply strategic superiority, it was psychological fracture. No territory had been claimed, no treaties had been broken. But the Accord, as an idea, had begun to corrode. If a compliant species could become invisible and use its invisibility to expose the enforcer's hypocrisy, then no system of control could be trusted. In the following days, more sub-member states began pulling back from the Halveth core. Some suspended trade deals, others initiated internal audits. No one spoke openly of allegiance shifts, but neutrality requests flooded Accord arbitration centers. Terran diplomats remained publicly silent. Their embassies did not speak. Their transports Kontisaitu knew to operate as if nothing had changed. That silence was louder than any declaration. Within military forums, one phrase began to circulate among senior analysts. It didn't originate from any official doctrine, nor was it taught in any war college. It passed quietly from officer to officer, written on the corners of data slates, whispered in closed briefings. Cold warfare collapse. Not war, not retreat, collapse. A method of conflict where the enemy removes not your fleet, but your need for one. A silent contest where action is answered not by force, but by fracture. No one knew if Earth would speak next. No one knew if they needed to. The Accord had built a galactic order on the presumption of central visibility. That presumption no longer held. And the power Earth now wielded wasn't in how many ships they launched. It was in how effortlessly they had made those ships vanish. Admiral Keth Valry stood at the heart of Nexus Command with every external display minimized. He didn't need graphs or maps, he needed silence. The kind of silence that came not from uncertainty, but from fury coiled so tightly it bent into stillness. 3 systems were under direct Accord lockdown: Jorvac, Sirin Ket, and Bolthar Spindle, each selected for strategic density and fleet mobility. Between them, 67 ships stood at launch readiness, each equipped with live doctrine AIs, adaptive comm overlays, and predictive threat models sourced from the top 20 enemy simulations across the last 5 decades. It should have been overkill. It wasn't even enough for contact. The first orders were straightforward. Re-establish data flow integrity, reboot off-world relay nodes, confirm satellite trust chains through redundant signal beacons. The expected timeline for response was under 4 minutes. After 6, every terminal in the central boardroom was still displaying the same flashing string, unresolved parity. It wasn't sabotage. There was no intrusion, no evidence of external data tampering. Instead, the network was folding in on itself, unsure if the information it was receiving was real, cached, or looped from its own previous verification sequence. One by one, the command nodes began routing through mirror backups, except the mirrors were also mirrored, and no one could trace the original source anymore. Across Jorvac, defensive orbital stations deployed interceptor wings by pre-scripted triggers, only for the units to drift mid-cycle, receiving no continuation signal. Drones launched, hovered, then powered down in soft standby, awaiting instructions from a core that now existed in 2 locations at once, neither of them validated. In Sirin Ket, battalion dropships prepared for counter-infiltration deployment. Their crews boarded, systems primed, and then nothing. Fleet control halted them at threshold range, citing unsafe navlink confirmation. When override commands were entered manually, the ship AIs flagged the operators as possible duplicates. Multiple security checks failed simultaneously. In the end, nothing launched, not because of damage, but because the Accord's own systems didn't trust themselves. Valry issued full manual overrides, bypassing non-essential protocols and activating legacy interface controls, the kind not used in over 40 years. For a moment he believed progress had been made, until command feedouts began mislabeling internal coordinates. Ships reported themselves docked and en route at the same time. Atmospheric thresholds reported fusion signatures that contradicted observed data. No sabotage, no battle, The battlefield had simply been rewritten, and Earth hadn't fired a shot. The entire Accord military infrastructure had been built around a single principle: prediction. It wasn't arrogance, it was optimization. Their fleet doctrines weren't reaction-based. They relied on preemptive movement, adversary behavior modeled against known psychological, historical, and doctrinal parameters. Fleet simulations were designed to track movement patterns, emotional triggers, command delay averages, but none of Earth's actions followed precedent. No formation appeared twice, no signal was sent more than once. Every ship executed one task, then disappeared, either deactivated or withdrawn before logging. What Earth had done was strip the Accord of its ability to extrapolate, and without extrapolation, no AI doctrine could deploy safely. Dozens of combat simulations terminated mid-process due to confidence collapse. If a prediction engine dropped below a certain threshold, it auto-aborted to prevent cascade failure. It had been a fail-safe for generations. Now it was a deadlock Earth used against them. Valerie paced the upper ring of Nexus Command, watching as specialists cycled through fallback protocol layers, trying to restore hierarchy. No attack was visible, nothing to target, no request for terms. Earth wasn't here to occupy, they were here to erase participation. Systems weren't destroyed, they were simply no longer trusted by the systems themselves. In a spacefaring civilization built around interconnectivity and total coordination, that was annihilation. Meanwhile, across the three systems, Earth's modular ships completed their objectives and vanished. They didn't transmit return coordinates, they didn't attempt extraction rendezvous. In several cases, Accord analysts were able to trace what they believed were post-operation trails, only to find uninhabited industrial hulks with burnt-out cores and no record of ever being armed. Earth's ships weren't designed to survive beyond their assignment. Their programming included self-deactivation, short-term memory collapse, and quantum ID randomization. They weren't reusable. They were proof. Evidence that Earth didn't just possess the capability, it had mastered the discipline to discard it immediately. From the outside, the tactics felt mythological. Accord military forums buzzed with speculation. Was Earth employing temporal feedback? Were the ships partially phased? Was this the result of some exotic cognition interface not yet accounted for? No, none of it. The truth was uglier. Earth had built a system so small, so decentralized, and so adaptive that the Accord's rigid legacy infrastructure simply couldn't see it clearly enough to stop it. They had built strength around anticipation. Earth had built silence into execution. Then the cleansing orders came. Desperation disguised as authority. Fleet Command, with Valerie's signature encoded, authorized orbital sterilization of 3 outer moons believed to be harboring Terran-linked artifacts. They expected resistance. What they received instead was collapse. The moment the weapons arrays went live, 3 unconnected sectors suffered simultaneous cascading system degradation. Comlinks failed. Sector AIs entered looped fallback. Civilian traffic grids began broadcasting emergency redundancy signals. Only no central hub could confirm them. The action had triggered Veilglass's contingency code. Earth hadn't placed tripwires in those regions. It had set up weighted reactions. Any act of direct cleansing would trigger conditional interference. But again, no explosions followed, no ships attacked. The sectors just stopped functioning in ways the Accord understood. Valerie didn't speak for 3 hours. When he finally did, it wasn't to issue a new order. It was to revoke every current one. He stood in front of the room, empty ept for his operations staff, and spoke a sentence that no one in the Accord's military had ever heard before. "We are not authorized to predict anymore." He didn't need to elaborate. Everyone understood. The doctrine had failed. Not because Earth was faster, stronger, or more advanced, but because Earth had erased the map the Accord had built its logic on. It wasn't tactical brilliance, it was structural clarity. Earth hadn't adapted to the system, they'd stepped outside it. And now, every fleet, every protocol, every AI was following rules that no longer applied. The message came without warning, woven into the heartbeat of the galactic mesh. It didn't override systems or force broadcast priority. It didn't blink or flash or beg to be heard. It was simply there. Short, perfectly structured, unadorned by crest, emblem, or diplomatic signature. Just a single Terran sentence. No empire was challenged, only consequence was delivered. For 3 seconds it hovered across every public channel. Then it vanished. Never repeated, never followed. The galaxy, stunned and speechless, played it back 1,000 times in 1,000 languages, and each time it stung deeper. It wasn't a declaration of victory, it was a clarification. And that distinction shook the foundations of every political model the Halveth Accord had spent centuries maintaining. Jorvac Station, once the most heavily defended orbital platform in the sector, now floated in quiet disrepair. Its outer rings were intact, but the central data tower remained frozen in a permanent reboot cycle. Security drones hovered with no directives, drifting through lifeless command corridors like artifacts from a system no longer in use. At the core of its ruined concourse, a single relay node had been installed, square, black, unmarked save for one detail etched in Terran standard, arbitration unprocessed. When accessed, it played a loop, not a threat, not a victory log, just a fragment of recorded dialogue, Earth's official petition to the Halveth Council during the Eridani IV crisis. The same request denied unanimously, the same voice, calm and lawful, asking for investigation. The audio ended just before the reply. No commentary, no rage, just memory. The symbolism was deliberate. Earth didn't demand reparations, it didn't set terms, it didn't even seek recognition. In a galaxy defined by conquest and counterbalance, Earth had chosen subtraction. Systems once reliant on Accord trade lanes found themselves unable to route goods as transport matrices failed to reconcile command verification. Regional authorities tried to establish independent arbitration bodies, but every time they activated synchronization routines, errors multiplied. The Accord's infrastructure hadn't been destroyed, it had been hollowed, and no one, not even its highest-ranking engineers, could pinpoint the center of the fracture. By remaining silent, Earth became louder than any speech. Their absence turned into presence, their non-response into doctrine. On neutral worlds, political factions that once parroted Accord authority now quoted Earth's message with cautious reverence. Debates erupted across diplomatic circles. Was this humanity's ascent or its withdrawal? But beneath every argument, one fact settled into the galactic bloodstream. Earth had not taken anything. It had simply refused to be erased, and that refusal had unspooled the assumptions that held the Accord's unity together. Former allies of the Accord began drifting. One by one, outer rim colonies declared neutrality, not out of fear, but exhaustion. They had watched a compliant species follow every rule, endure every limit, and still be violated. When that species responded, it didn't riot or invade, it pulled the plug. That kind of discipline didn't read as rebellion, it read as judgment. No one wanted to be next. Meanwhile, the galactic economy reeled. Intersystem shipping networks began suffering cascading errors as trust certifications failed to verify. Planetary commerce slowed. Logistics chains looped in endless approval cycles with no universal standard left to align them. The Accord had been the unspoken backbone of galactic scheduling. Now, with its command structure paralyzed and its member states divided, nothing moved fast. Nothing moved clean. Earth didn't fill the gap. It didn't offer an alternative. It simply stepped back and left the void untouched. Terran strike corps, those ghost machines that had dismantled an empire without a war, began disappearing. Not through destruction, but through deactivation. Across sectors once rattled by invisible Terran interference, industrial craft resumed ordinary patterns. Mining rigs returned to known vector paths, transit freighters realigned with their original haul routes. The same vessels that had crippled coordination networks now moved like nothing had ever happened. Terran shipping manifests reopened, neutral, transparent, and boring. Some Accord analysts predicted Earth was repositioning, preparing for a second wave. But it never came. Instead, one by one, the modular combat cores went offline. Their power signatures faded, their control modules were sealed, some were dismantled, others left to drift. Earth wasn't building a fleet, it was erasing evidence of one. The point had been made. Repeating it would have cheapened the lesson. In the wake of Earth's withdrawal, scattered attempts to regain order surfaced. Emergency councils formed, Accord successor bodies emerged, but nothing held. The core systems had not been defeated, they had been made irrelevant. Their predictive engines, once calibrated to calculate responses across dozens of civilizations, couldn't make sense of a civilization that didn't announce, didn't pee. Ostur didn't follow any known template of power. Earth's only action now was silence, and the galaxy, with all its sensors, cameras, and relays, had never been more aware of it. At the heart of Nexus Command, Admiral Keth Valry sat alone in a room that used to feel unshakable. The boards around him no longer lit with urgency, just soft static indicators, frozen status markers on systems that still existed but no longer functioned. He replayed Earth's message again. No empire was challenged, only consequence was delivered. That wasn't war. That was correction. And it was worse than defeat. It was irrelevance. Earth hadn't raised its voice. It hadn't rallied allies. It hadn't claimed dominion. It had only waited, until silence said more than any weapon could. It ended not with an explosion or treaty, but with dispersion. The Helveth Accord fractured into pieces too small to recognize their own shape. Regional blocks formed quickly, some out of habit, others out of fear. A few declared continuity, clinging to the name like a symbol might restore function, but the fabric was gone. Trust had been its spine, predictability its breath, and Earth had collapsed both with surgical silence. No capital was raised, no flag was trampled. Yet the Accord's fleets drifted without directive. Its economy froze beneath unresolved handshakes, and its most faithful worlds no longer answered to anything but localized commands. The collapse had already happened. It just took time for the realization to catch up. Earth made no move to claim what was left. Where most civilizations might have stepped forward, raising banners or issuing charter reforms, Earth withdrew, completely. Its vessels returned to baseline activity, cargo, transport, mining, research. Every system Earth had ever touched resumed its assigned public function. Terran diplomats refused to attend the emergency summits. When API roached for negotiation, they replied with logistics confirmations, not policy statements. In sectors stripped of command infrastructure, Earth simply passed through, never settling, never claiming, as if the most devastating strategic dismantling in modern galactic history had been nothing more than an automated routine. Across neutral systems, something strange began to unfold. The absence of Accord oversight created panic, but also opportunity. Within months, new doctrines surfaced. The first to gain traction was a simple legal clause in a border world constitution: Fleet Autonomy Mandate. It stated that no external entity could demand fleet formation approval. It spread like wildfire, not because of Earth's direct influence, but because its example left no alternative. Soon after came another phrase: network disruption readiness. What began as a technical term in shipping protocols became the backbone of an entirely new military strategy. Doctrines that once centered on fleet size, firepower, and formation discipline were rewritten to account for unseen interference, misdirection, and infrastructure subtraction. Earth had not given anyone a new manual. It had made the old ones unusable. Back on Earth, Ryvan Dax disappeared from the record. He had no funeral, no retirement announcement, no commendation. His name was quietly stripped from all public systems. What remained of the Delphi chamber followed him into silence. Archived, sealed, forgotten by design. There were no statues, no public shrines, no broadcast tributes. Yet everyone who mattered knew who had moved the pieces. In Terran military academies, cadets studied operational sequences with no author listed. In schools, students were introduced to decision trees of limited visibility and action detachment modeling. No one called it veil glass anymore. It was now referred to only by one name: the Severance Protocol. The galaxy never agreed on what exactly had happened. There was no unified archive, no confirmed count of destroyed systems or lost fleets. The Accord itself had kept no record of its own unraveling. But every war historian who studied the event, every analyst who tried to define it, landed on the same designation: not conquest, not insurrection, not war, just the severance. That one term made its way into the record banks of 28 species. It became the baseline for a new era, one measured not by territory gained, but by assumptions broken. Other civilizations looked inward. Without a central arbiter, they re-examined their dependencies. Systems once automated were now run by cautious hands. Predictions gave way to observation. A single untraceable vessel could halt a fleet deployment. A single diplomatic silence could trigger regime change. What Earth had shown wasn't strength, it was control of meaning. Their power didn't scale, it calibrated, and then it vanished. The horror wasn't in what they did, it was in how little of them remained when it was over. Still, Earth left behind one signal. On an uninhabited moon orbiting what had once been an Accord judiciary world, a single Terran beacon was discovered by a trade scout. The beacon was old, simple by modern standards, but its signal was live. No encryption, no demand, just a loop. It didn't contain Earth's broadcast. It didn't replay footage or doctrine. It simply cycled 3 lines: the date of Earth's arbitration request, the timestamp of its denial, and the words "arbitration unprocessed." The scout didn't touch it. No one did. Over time, ships gave it wide berth. Not out of fear, out of recognition. It remains untouched. Not a symbol of victory, a marker of refusal. What would you do if your civilization followed every rule, only to be erased anyway? Did Earth go too far, or did they deliver the only justice the galaxy would understand? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear how you would have handled the severance. And if you're hungry for more high-stakes HFY stories, hit that subscribe button and don't miss what comes next.